Hi everyone, thank you very much for coming to Let's Go Outside with Trev Massiah. Welcome Trev, I can see that people are starting to arrive. We really appreciate that everybody who does come tonight has come, because I know that the rules have eased up, particularly in England, and also it's a really sunny night, so we really appreciate that you've taken the time to turn up. If you have any tech issues tonight connecting, there is a reconnect button at the top that you can hit, or you could clear your internet kind of history and then reconnect from the link in your email. We've experienced a couple of wee connection issues, so if we do have any kind of pauses tonight, we'll see how that goes. But we're planning on sharing this afterwards on YouTube. So again, if you've any issues kind of staying with the connection, you should be able to watch it again afterwards. So Trev Massiah is a climbing guide and coach based in Costa Blanca in Spain. He runs his business Rock and Sun, teaching climbing in Spain, but also at lots of amazing locations all around the world. He holds a mountain instructor award and has been working in the outdoor industry since the early 80s, so has tons and tons of experience to draw from tonight. And he's a good friend of TCA, so we're really pleased that he's been able to join us. I'm going to ramble a wee bit more, Trev, before we come to you.
Yep, no worries.
Obviously, climbing centres have been closed for a long time over the last year, and that has meant that a lot of climbers who perhaps were only indoor climbers before have headed outside for the first time, and that's brilliant, and we're all for that. We want to make sure that everyone's as safe as possible and that they feel as confident as possible whenever they go outside, which is why we thought it was important to do this. We also know with the Olympics coming up that a lot more people are going to be getting into the sport and seeing it, people who weren't aware of it before. So again, we wanted to have a resource that's going to help people feel confident whenever they're climbing outside. We're going to touch on lots and lots of different things tonight. None of this is a replacement for climbing coaching, and I'm sure Trev will say that himself, but we really recommend that you book some proper coaching, proper training, or just have someone who knows what they're doing, who can show you how to do it right. Tonight is just to give you an idea of all the things that you need to start thinking about so that you can then take your climbing journey forward. So to get started, Trev, can you tell us a wee bit about your first ever experience of climbing outside?
Yeah, so my first climbing experience was actually in Pembrokeshire, in North Thames, a little crag called Porthclais, just outside St David's. And I'd gone there as part of a youth training skiing program back in the it would have been 1984, probably in the late winter, early spring. To be honest, I didn't get it. I really think it was a horrible experience. I got lowered down this slab in the rain with a crashing sea below, and then top roped back up this thing. It was literally an abseil in and a climb out, because the weather was so awful that we were going to do something, and that's what we were going to do. And I just remember thinking, people do this for fun, and I was keen on kayaking. That's what my big thing was back then, and that's the reason I went off to this outdoor education centre, was because I was going to get a summer placement fixing their kayaks, keeping the fleet on the water, and obviously train as a kayaking rock climbing instructor at the same time, running trips. And yeah, so with my my street shoes on, trainers, I managed to clamber my way up some sort of HBS, which was given E1 at the time, and everyone was very impressed. And I was I couldn't understand what was so impressive about it, because you kind of have no choice, right? You're down at sea level, you have to get out. So I didn't really understand. I didn't get climbing until I started leading. As soon as I had a rack of gear on me to play with, and you were launching up these routes, you know, nothing difficult, sort of starting off on V-diffs and severes and placing gear, then it all seemed very exciting and made sense to me. Yeah. So yeah, I definitely spent the first maybe couple of months being more of a paddler than a climber, and now I've gravitated more towards climbing.
I think that's an interesting start, because I think, you know, climbing centres are so they're all over the place now. So many people get their introduction through a climbing centre and kind of going straight into trad to me seems terrifying.
Yeah, there were no walls back then. It was outside, and that was it. So you pretty much started leading very quickly.
Yeah. And what is it that you love about climbing outdoors?
I think actually, I think that was the interesting thing about that experience, is that what I realized is over time, and I enjoy being outdoors. It's actually the outdoors that I enjoy as much as anything. And I think it took me a long time to realize that, because when I was when you're climbing, you're preoccupied with stuff. You know, you're busy doing stuff, especially trad climbing, you've got stuff to do. But as soon as I started fishing, and through fishing, I realized that I could quite happily sit on a rock somewhere by the sea fishing for hours and just enjoy being outside. And that's one of the few things I do where I'm not actively engaged in a sport of some kind. And now I kind of really appreciate that time where I can just take in. And that's those moments you get when you get to the top of a route and you're belaying and you can actually enjoy your surroundings because you're not preoccupied with the climb itself. So I think that's the thing I enjoy about it. I enjoy people, the different people you meet, the relationships that you forge, the different kind of sceneries, the different situations you get in, and the traveling. You know, and obviously the climbing is just, you know, the older I get, the more I enjoy my climbing, which, you know, is I mean, I've been climbing for 36 years now, and I'm enjoying it as much as I've ever enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's cool. And I guess, again, 2020 for so many of us will have given us an appreciation of the outdoors that, you know, we maybe took for granted before. And, you know, when you're only allowed to go out for a walk for an hour a day, it's different. So, but also filling that time with something that is really rewarding is brilliant. Do you think that climbing outside needs a different mindset or approach? Obviously, we're guessing that most of our audience tonight will be people who do climb indoors. You know, is it a headset, a mindset thing?
Yeah, I think there is definitely a mindset that you want to carry with climbing, I think, which leads to greater enjoyment of the activity. I think one of the things I've noticed over the years, especially with working more and more with people that are coming from an indoor climbing background, and this isn't per se, but I think people get focused on grades a lot, and rules, and then it can stop the enjoyment of the climbing. So I think for me, the key sort of mindset you need to have when you go outdoors is just to think about the experience, the quality of the experience and the process you're in, rather than the outcome. So like enjoying, like if you have a day out when you're not climbing so well, just to actually don't be focused on the grade. You know, you've also got to realize that climbing on real rock is a very different experience and different medium to climbing on plastic.
Yeah.
So I think if you go with that mindset, lower your expectations, and realize that when you go to like a crag for the first time, or if you go to a different rock type for the first time, just start easy, and you know, be a friend to yourself and make sure you warm up slowly on easy routes and work out where you are, because you know, whenever you go to a different rock type, there's more to learn, and there's specific things that are different about climbing on real rock to climbing indoors. So if we can appreciate that, don't sort of get focused on, I climb 6B indoors or whatever, so I have to jump on, I have to do that. You know, I prefer to go to the crag, look at the routes that I like the look of, and then look in the guidebook maybe to see what grade they are, if I can climb them, and be more focused on the process and the activity, rather than, you know, if I didn't get to the top. And often we go to the crag and you see people that are complaining about the route feeling too hard, rather than just, you know, dropping down and accepting that it might be slightly different than what they can produce indoors.
Yeah, and even different countries. So having climbed, say, in the south of France and realizing that actually the grades there seem an awful lot stiffer. Maybe that's just me, but no, I believe they're a lot stiffer than certain other places that then people say, are fairly soft grades. So that's something you have to understand, that different people bolting in different countries, the grades may differ as well. You mentioned rock type there. Do you want to kind of give a few of the main characteristics of different types of rock that people might climb on?
Yeah, like if you, for instance, climb on limestone, it's generally, it can be vertical, sometimes slabby, but there's often vertical or overhanging, with a variety of different types of holds on. It can polish up, but it can be, it can go from being slabby limestone to gymnastic, steep, overhanging with tufas dripping off it, that sort of thing. So I think out of all the rock types, limestones probably has the greater variety of climbing techniques. And then, it's often positive holds, pockets, cracks. And then if you go to, say, granite as an example, it's often slabby or vertical at most. And it can be really grippy and really rough, or it can feel very sort of shiny and slippery. And it can be very slippery when it's wet, of course. And granite tends to feature more cracks and edges rather than things like pockets and tufas like you get on limestone. But then you have things like slate, for instance, which hardly any friction, and lots of edges, lots of space between very positive or very, sometimes small edges. So it can be low friction, also have cracks in as well. And then, of course, you've got quarried rock. So all those rock types could be quarried, and then the characteristics there can be very different. So you can have these sheets of rock that's very, very blank between cracks or breaks. So each rock type you go to, there's a different sort of skill set that you need to think about in order to be successful climbing them.
Yeah. I remember my first experience on grit, kind of people saying to me, just trust your feet, just trust your feet. And you're like, I can't trust, it's so steep, but it's because it's so grippy and it's such a different experience.
Yeah, and it takes time to kind of get used to those differences. Like if I go, I spent most of my life climbing on limestone, and obviously in the mountains as well on volcanic rock types. But I found that whenever I go, say, up to the peak to climb on grit, that it takes at least a couple of days to really, get into that mode of climbing. And then conditions are really important as well. So, to know that if you want to climb on grit, you to get the best out of it, you kind of want to be, cold conditions, almost uncomfortably cold. So, adjusting your expectations due to conditions is super important. So if it's a really hot day, you might only have the gritstone available to you, but that's not the day to be sort of getting on your hardest lead when it's super hot and not very grippy. Whereas limestone, that's fine in hot temperatures, and I like climbing in the heat, but it can get polished, so it can be slippery with sweaty hands. But it often has very positive holds to stand on with your feet. So thinking about conditions and thinking about the weather conditions is super important as well. They can change. Like when you set off for a climbing trip, you need to make sure that you take into account what the conditions are doing as well, like whether you're climbing in the shade or climbing in the sun.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you brought up the kind of how polished limestone can get, and having been to lots of crags where the easiest climbs at the crag are the ones that people warm up on, but if you're coming to climbing for the first time, that the one that other people warm up on might be the one that you're working for the day, but because it gets most traffic, it's most polished. And maybe if you want to have a clip stick, to make sure you've got your first clip in, because those starting feet might be super slippy, and just to be aware of that, because I think it can be a bit of a shock to the system when you realize just how slippy those feet can be.
Yeah, I think realizing that if you're starting out and you're climbing the lower grades, they do get more traffic. So yeah, not to be put off by that, but also not to be put off by how the first route of the day goes. For instance, like you say, you might get on the first route of the day and it might be polished and slippery because it is the route that people warm up on. And I think also people forget that easing into your climbing day is super important. I mean, I think one of the biggest mistakes I recognize is that I often see people hanging on the first route of the day. Mm-hmm. So, and I always look at that and I think, maybe you should have just been kind to yourself and warmed up on something that you could, at least 2 or 3 routes that you can cruise before you jump on something that might actually spit you off. Because it can make a massive difference to the outcome of your day by just making sure that you drop down enough grades so that you can, and also choosing the right crag, of course, that has plenty of routes that you can do.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the biggest mistakes I see. People turn up at the crag and they're already hanging on the first route of the day. And also, I mean, I guess that leads to another thing about turning up at the crag, is that if you get on the first route of the day and it's much harder than you think, I always think it is better to sit on the rope and not get a cold pump and make sure you save yourself for the rest of the day.
Yeah. So. And I guess you need to not have too much pride. So if you are fairly new to it and you're with people who've done it before, and maybe maybe you're similar grades inside, but maybe they've just got more confidence outside because they're just used to it. So not to force yourself to warm up on the same route that they're warming up on if there is something easier, if you're struggling with it, and not to let pride get in the way of actually approaching the day in the right way.
Yeah, I think we all make that mistake. We can all get drawn on to something, especially when we like the look of it. But yeah, that's a nice thing about, in particular, sport climbing, but even trad. I mean, if you're going somewhere and you're going to be climbing all day, whatever, whether it's trad or sport, is to make sure that, you don't have to be climbing the same routes. And certainly with sport climbing, there's no reason for everyone to be climbing the same routes. But we certainly get that with a number of our clients, is that people often worry about if they're good enough to come on a climbing holiday or trip. And we're constantly trying to explain that it really doesn't matter, because you're not holding anyone back. You get on whatever route's appropriate to you, and we always go to crags that have got a good spread of grades, and that's really important. So yeah, the peer pressure. If you'd rather top rope something rather than lead it, then also do that. But warm up slowly and go to a crag that's got suitable routes for the group, really.
Yeah, and with bouldering as well, it's super easy for everybody to be trying completely different things. If they're in an area that's got a good grade range on one block, you might have lots of different grades. So super easy to go out with people who are climbing much harder than you and may actually encourage you to kind of try harder or try different things. Crag etiquette is a big thing that's different to indoor climbing. No matter what type of climbing you're going to head out to do. What do you think are the main things that people should be thinking about when they head outside in terms of etiquette?
Yeah, I think it's good to look in the guidebook to see what the standard procedure is at the crag that you go into, or the area that you go into. Some places have very strict rules on things like whether or not you abseil off the anchor. Don't see that too much these days, but there are some places, especially in wilderness areas in the States and some European countries as well, Germany and Austria in particular, lots of players where they expect you to abseil rather than to just lower off the in situ gear. Making sure that
in the guidebook, is that where people will find that information?
Yeah, and the guidebooks are obviously a useful source of. It's not just about topos and the routes and route descriptions, but usually there's very clear information about what the general procedure is for those sorts of things. Making sure that if you in a larger group and you're going to you might be leading a route. There might be a whole group of you all going to be leading the route. Some of you might be top roping the route. Put your own protection on the anchors rather than lower off. And then obviously the last person to do the route, whether they're top roping or whether they're leading, can then clean the route so you're not wearing out the anchors. But those sorts of things are pretty standard. And then also, if you're trying a route, for a length of time, if other people turn up, make sure that you are be aware that other people might want to climb something, especially if you're on sort of easy warm-up routes. And what we normally do is offer, if people look like they're sort of waiting and looking like they want to get on the route, is let them climb the route, and they'll often move on quite quickly, especially if they're experienced climbers. And then just thinking about how you conduct yourself at the Crag. Not all of us will get introduced to climbing by other climbers anymore. Certainly, when I started climbing, everyone I went climbing with was pretty much more experienced than me, and I just learned from those people how to behave and what the rules are and how you conduct yourself. But it's things like if you turn up at the Crag, for instance, try not to put all your kit against the wall. Underneath routes, if there's a clear space where there are clearly no roots or no bolts, then that's fine. But always think about having your kit, away from where people might be starting the routes. Think about noise. If you're at the Crag on your own and you've got music and you want to play it, that's fine. But if other people turn up, it might be appropriate to maybe not ask, because most people are too polite to say they'd rather you turn it off. So it's probably better to assume that, if you're sharing the Crag with other people, they'd rather not listen to your music. So those sort of things are important. And then there's things like litter, noise, unnecessary shouting, those sorts of things can be really important. Just being aware of people around you and sharing the Crag environment in an appropriate way. And if you've got pets with you, dogs, then make sure you keep them under control. And not everyone necessarily is a dog lover, and people might be allergic to them. So when a big sloppy dog comes and jumps in front of you and tries to steal your lunch, not everyone's a great fan of that experience. So those sort of things are important.
Yeah, and there's nothing worse than being at a Crag and realizing that there's a pile of loo roll just round the corner over there, or sometimes in front of the easiest route, because that happens to be the one at the end of the Crag.
So there's two of my pet hates. I've got a few, but so loo roll is definitely a big one. You often see a lot of loo roll in the area you might head off to the toilet for. And I think females are probably guilty of the toilet roll, just without anything else associated with it. And men are guilty of, this is the worst one, peeing against the rock.
Yeah.
It's ludicrous to even mention it, but literally, I was walking off the Crag one day with my partner, and we literally came down the hillside. We're in Clymnus to another section of Crag, and there's a group of 3 people, and one of the guys literally stepped maybe 2 or 3 routes to the left and peed against the wall. So I made some very disgruntled noises, but it is the way it is. I mean, for some reason men like to pee against something. They're well trained to do that. But toilet paper, obviously a no. So sort of things that, I mean, on that subject, I find, so I've got a biodegradable plastic bag with a bag of wet wipes.
Yep.
I think they're way more efficient. So you use less paper, and you have something to clean your hands with afterwards. Yep. And then they will go in a biodegradable bag.
Yeah.
So just take it with you. I mean, it's a big gripe that you shouldn't have to kind of say, but a couple of times recently, I've turned up at the Crag and had to deal with someone else's poo.
It's not nice.
Yeah.
I've climbed somewhere in America where when you arrived at the car park, they actually had, as part of the national park thing, that they actually had kind of bags that were specifically for people doing number 2s, and you could take them. I can't remember if there was a donation for it, but they just don't want anybody leaving anything. The more people can think about it in advance, the better.
Yeah, think of it in advance. I mean, just try and train yourself to go to the toilet beforehand. Of course, you can't always make sure that you don't need to go to the toilet at the Crag, but make sure in some areas it might be appropriate to have a shovel with you, a small shovel, or dig a hole with the heel of your foot, or a rock, and then cover it over. Don't go underneath a rock. That's not, you'll get children playing at the Crag, picking up stones and all sorts of things, and it's not really what you want. So you need to be kind of aware of those things and make sure that you're comfortable in the outdoor environment. So I think things like wipes and bags. I mean, lots of supermarkets use biodegradable bags now for the bed produce. So I reuse those. So I have several different things that I take at the Crag for that purpose. Take all your rubbish with you.
Good advice. What do you think are the most common mistakes made by climbers transitioning into the outdoors? What do they not think about? What do they not know about? What's new?
Well, let's talk a little bit about technique first. I think we did talk about the fact that people find climbing on real rock harder, and I think that getting some good coaching and understanding that training indoors can be really good for your standard, but it's almost impossible to recreate a real Crag indoors. It would just be too expensive to have the variety of options that you have. So often climbers make big movements with their feet and pull themselves up on their arms. The space between the footholds indoors is much greater than the skill in climbing outside is to actually be able to keep your feet close together and to make small steps and push up with the legs. Yeah. So, that constant high step rock over move that you don't necessarily need to do is probably the big one technically. And then there's all sorts of, mistakes like back clipping, quick draws, for instance, making sure that you understand how you should clip a quick draw. In the invite for this webinar, there's the quick draw video that is really useful, I think, just for that understanding. Maybe coming to the Crag with the wrong equipment. Mm-hmm. So make sure you have enough quick draws. Look in the guidebook, check, for instance, the average length of the routes, or the longest route that you might want to do at the Crag, and make sure that you bring enough draws and also the right length rope. Yeah. We're all guilty sometimes of wanting to save weight and to only carry what we need, but having enough quick draws and also having a long enough rope. I always recommend, when you're going to buy, say, a sport rope, to buy an 80-meter rope, because then you're less likely to get into trouble. But so the big ones are really threading anchors. People make mistakes there. Belaying, getting the rope behind your leg, and obviously maybe lowering off the end of the rope is a big mistake. That seems to be something that becomes more and more of a common issue. Yeah.
And I guess some of the things I kind of had noted down were things like, obviously when you climb inside, if you're doing sport climbing, whatever, the bolts are evenly spaced, and they may not be evenly spaced, or they may be on an easier route. Sometimes I've found that the bolting isn't as generous because whoever's bolted it has just felt dead confident on the route, and that might be the easy one, and then maybe the harder one might have more regular kind of bolting, and just to kind of get used to the fact that can vary, and things that you don't have to do whenever you're inside, such as cleaning the route or particularly cleaning an overhang. Obviously we can't give the exact kind of training within this format, but do you want to talk a wee bit about kind of cleaning an overhang and how difficult that is?
Yeah, well, obviously, again, with all these things that we talk about, I mean, there are quite a lot of things on YouTube as well, but none of those things supplement sort of first-hand instruction, of course. But if you're coming off a route that's overhanging, you're lowering off, you're trying to get the draws off two things will happen. You'll either swing away from the wall and you won't be able to reach the quick draws. If
Yeah.
you clip yourself into the rope so that you, as you lower down, so you're actually on the rope with a quick draw, then that keeps you into the wall close enough to retrieve your quick draws. But the weight that creates on the rope makes it difficult to actually unclip the quick draw from the bolt. So therefore, there's a process that you need to know in order to be able to unweight the rope and retrieve the quick draw from the bolt. Yeah. So it's things like that you need to be kind of aware of, that are different from climbing indoors. I mean, as I mentioned before as well, getting the rope behind your leg when you're climbing, for instance, if you've mainly only climbed indoors, what you'll find is the opportunities to get the rope behind your leg are very infrequent because the bolts are so close together. So therefore, it's only a problem when you go above the bolt and the rope goes behind your leg. It will flip upside down when you fall off. Whereas, as you say, outdoors, sometimes the bolting is variable. So you can have these long distances, and then it's more important to make sure you're aware of where the rope is. So those are the sort of things you don't necessarily get to learn indoors. Retrieving your kit, from the anchor, obviously, is something you need to be aware of. And I just realised that we did skip one thing that we'll go back to, which was the access.
Yeah.
Before you head out, actually make sure that there's the BMC website is a great source of information for access, and also UKC, but make sure that there aren't bird nesting restrictions and access to the crag of your choice, which is super important.
Yeah. I realise another thing that we have, an assumption that we have made, and obviously people attending will have quite varied experiences, but again, if we're talking about sport climbing, we're using the phrase clean the route. Someone who's attending tonight might not even know what that means. Again, do you want to kind of just give a rough overview of
Yeah, I think it's fair to kind of talk about sport climbing as such, because if you're looking at people venturing outdoors from the indoors, then more than likely they are going to be either bouldering or they're going to be sport climbing. So if you were thinking of heading out trad climbing, obviously that's not something that you should or would feel comfortable doing on your own without expert instruction. So there's not a huge amount of difference between bouldering indoors and bouldering outdoors, apart from the padding and making sure that the landings are safe. Yeah. That takes some skill, and also as does spotting. But then if you're going from indoor rope climbing to outdoor sport climbing, it's completely feasible that you might be confident enough heading out on your own to do that without expert instruction. And then you just need to know these other things around that are different from when you're climbing in the gym. So I will mainly be talking about sport climbing, because I think that's more appropriate for people to be going out and doing on their own. Obviously, like we say, the cleaning of routes. So when you have a sport anchor, you might place your own equipment on it. It could be that you put what we tend to do, a screw gate and a quick draw on the anchor, so that we can lower off that equipment, and at the end someone will have to retrieve that equipment in order to not leave anything behind. You do sometimes see that people haven't managed to get that, and you go to the crag and people have left it behind. I think I've seen people lower off and leave their gear behind because they realize they don't know how to get it back. And also, I've had a few clients that have done that thing of going off to a sport climbing venue, and then realizing that they didn't know anything. So they've come on a course and been comfortable enough admitting that they made that classic mistake of going off for a trip, and then realizing there are all these things that are different, like, how do we get our gear back? So I think one thing is don't assume everything's going to be the same as it is indoors, but also don't be afraid to ask you know, to you know, other people at the Crag are usually willing to help if you've made a mistake or if you're not sure about something. So, you know, make sure that you know, like these sessions are useful to be aware of what the differences are.
Yeah.
Like for instance, it's standard for a lot of people. One of the classic mistakes we see is 2 quick draws on the anchor. So one of the reasons that we use a screw gate rather than 2 quick draws on an anchor is sometimes when people are top roping and they're cleaning at the end. So what we'll have is you'll see a novice, so maybe less experienced person in the group who might be climbing up, retrieving the quick draws as they go. And when they get to the anchor, actually unclip the both quick draws. Yeah. And you can do that quite quickly. So we tend to work with a screw gate. So even if you get to the anchor and you unclip one of the quick draws, you still have the rope fixed in a screw gate, which offers a bit of time and something very different for someone to do. I know it sounds, some of the mistakes people make, it sounds hard to believe that it's possible to do that. So this is, I think, why it's important to, before you head out, actually get some expert advice, and maybe not just from your friends, or some experienced advice, but not from your friends, because this is something I've seen happen on several occasions, actually. So several occasions. I probably see that maybe 10, 15 times a year.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I guess that could happen at the top. Am I right in thinking that could happen because either the finish of the route is slabby enough that the person can stand and they just take everything off, or that they've got their safety, if they've got a safety kind of sling with them and they're hooked on, that they feel that they're safe because of that, and then they just take the quick draws off? Is that how that happens?
So the scenario I was just describing would be someone top roping. So you're climbing up top. The rope is clipped into the quick draws. So as you're climbing the route, the rope that you're climbing up on would be through the quick draws, and you're collecting them as you go up, which is often easier and necessary, especially if the route's overhanging. If you've got a really steeply overhanging route, it can be better to sometimes clean on top rope rather than have this difficulty that you have sometimes getting the gear off on the way down. But then people don't necessarily realize that they've reached the top of the route. So they're just very much, if you're inexperienced, you're on autopilot. So you move up, you unclip a quick draw, put it on your harness, you get to the anchor, you see a quick draw, and you unclip it. Yeah. And it's instant unclip, and you see a second one, and you just unclip that as well. And there isn't the time necessary to think that that's something I should not be doing, that I'm actually right at the top of the route. So again, it's one of those classic mistakes that some can be hard to imagine people would make. But I mean, we get this, like I say, 10 or 15 times a year at least. Someone will get to the top of the route, and they might ask for slack. If I know that, if you can see that at the top, don't give it. But then what they do is they unclip the quick draw, and then when they see the screw gate, then they've noticed their mistake. Yeah. So it's things like that are hard to predict. Yeah.
I know that we planned to show a kind of 5-minute video that's got a couple of examples of threading anchors, but I'm just conscious of, we've got 20 minutes and still lots of questions. Do you want to, will we put in the video now, or do you want to continue with kind of questions in chat?
Let's put the video in now. Yeah. So that people that
can respond to that.
Yeah, that aren't familiar with the process might have some questions.
Okay. From that. Do you want to introduce what we're about to show?
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to show one version of how to thread an anchor, how to get the rope through the anchor in situ and retrieve your own equipment to lower off at the end of your climb.
Okay, I know that there's 2 versions in the video. Do you want me just to show the first one?
Let's just show the first one.
Yeah, okay, I'll do that just now. We'll turn our audio and video off. And let's load that up. And that should play now.
So I've climbed to the anchor. I can either hang off this mono here or grab the chain. And I clip the rope in to make myself safe. Then while I'm holding on to the anchor, I'll just remove my sling and I'm going to clip that into the ring, close it, lock it. As soon as I'm hanging on the sling, I'll keep my weight on it during the whole process. Now what I'm going to do is grab the rope from the belayer, place that through the ring double, pull that all the way down to my hip, and then I'm going to tie an overhand knot with a very small loop. Okay, tiny loop. Put that into my screw gate that I've got on the front of my harness and lock it. Now once I've checked that's locked, I can untie. Pull the end through the ring to the anchor so I can see what I've done. I'm going to tie a backup knot in the end of the rope with a nice long loop. Now I can clean the anchor. Shout down, down. Once the rope comes tight, I pull myself up, test that the rope is holding me and the sling is redundant. That means I've done everything correctly. Then I can unclip my sling. I can leave that hanging and shout lower, and I lower to the ground.
So just to let you know, there are a number of videos on Trev's website that show some really useful stuff. So I know you've got threading anchors, common mistakes, chat about quick draws, falling practice, how to clean a route when lowering, clipping, how to avoid falling upside down, all of that kind of stuff. So there's some good videos there if you want to go and visit that. What are the common mistakes people make whenever they're threading anchors?
That particular method involves actually clipping yourself in with a sling or your personal anchoring system, whatever you prefer to use, and then threading the rope through the anchor if you can, if it fits, double, and then tying that or attaching that to a screw gate on your belay loop. So it's not, I would say it's not necessarily absolutely the safest. It's hard to describe as safe or not safe, but for me, it's the preferred method I would teach. The reason for that is the other method that you could use is to untie, put the end through, which you'll have to do if you can't get the rope through double, and tie back in. So one of the interesting things about instructing is sometimes you teach a method that is less likely, that people are less likely to get wrong. Yeah. So with this method, you are threading through the anchor and you're attaching it to your harness before you untie. Yeah. What might be the simplest, cleanest method would be to attach the rope to yourself so you can't drop it, untie, go through the anchor and retie in, and then untie the knot that you tied for to make sure that you didn't drop the rope during that process. Now, the problem with that method, although it might be the best one, is that whatever you tend to teach, people don't always retain all the information. So people regularly forget to attach the rope to themselves before they untie. So the common mistake could be you untie, go to thread the anchor, and then you drop the rope. So and again, I've certainly had clients that have come on trips because this is one of the mistakes that they've made. Yep. So now you've got someone at the top of the route and you've got a belayer with a rope, but no one to belay them necessarily to get up. So so this is one of the reasons that when you're setting off outdoors and you know that you haven't had any professional instruction, you might be taught by your friends, it might be better to get some professional instruction rather than just head out on your own. So one of the things I always suggest people do, especially if they don't really feel they can afford to hire a guide for the day, is to think about, a group of people. Like one instructor at one MIA, for instance, could probably work with a group of 10 or 12 people and flip between a group and do little sessions while people are actually climbing for the day, rather than it being like a full-on day of instruction. So you can pick up a lot in that situation that you can't just get off of YouTube. So
idea. Can I ask a question? Matt has come in with a question to say that he said, I thought that when you pull the rope through, I was to tie a figure of 8 on a bite. You used an overhand knot. Are there any problems with me using a figure of 8 there?
No, absolutely not. So again, there's no problems at all with a figure of 8. One of the reasons I teach a overhand knot is because not everybody has enough experience or knowledge of knots to tie a figure of 8 on a bite. So as an example, when I'm teaching, I'll see people on the anchor practicing, and I might be right next to them, and they're trying to remember how to tie a figure of 8 on the bite.
Yeah.
Now that creates a stress situation for them, because it might sound simple. An overhand knot is much easier to tie. It's much easier to remember, and it's better that you've got a knot in there. The only disadvantage you can have with a figure of 8 is whatever knot you tie, you do want to have a small loop and the knot very close to the screw gate, so that it's not competing for length with your sling.
Yeah.
So that you have space to practice letting go and have the anchoring system hold your weight, rather than the knot butt up against the anchor.
Yeah. I was taught to climb by a friend, and then whenever I wanted to do trad, I booked a couple of days one-on-one coaching with somebody to kind of let me know, give me all the information that I needed, that I used to rely on friends for. And one of the kind of learning curves then of learning that information and feeling confident with it was going climbing with other people who are more experienced and seeing that they do it differently, and realizing that there isn't just one way to do it, but it's the principles and primarily the safety things. So, like what you demonstrated in the video, making sure that the rope has taken you before you take your safety off, whatever way that safety system's set up, as long as you're checking things like that. It's those principles that are the most important part of it. Yeah,
and it's good to not get too bogged down in, there is often no one right way. If it's safe, it's fine. So if you have, often if people come to me and they've got a certain way of doing it, I'll often say, show me what you do. And if it's not the same as what I teach, but they've got a system and it's safe, I much prefer that they would stick with that system rather than trying to learn a new one. Because if there's nothing wrong with it, I don't need to change it. I might sometimes add a few little things in, like for instance, the knot in the end of the rope that I tie there, the backup knot. That's because I've seen someone tie an inappropriate knot on their screw gate with a slip knot rather than a figure of 8 or an overhand knot. If you tie a knot on the end of the rope, doesn't matter whether it's a slip knot, figure of 8, or overhand knot, that actually jams up against the carabiner.
Yeah.
So that's something I witnessed. So therefore, the fix for that is to have the backup knot in the rope.
Yeah, and if anyone's seen Free Solo, it can happen to absolutely anyone. So Alex Honnold got dropped off the end of his rope being lowered off in that film at one point, because if there'd been a knot in the end of the rope, which him as the experienced climber should have known that was a good thing to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we should do, actually, procedures that we should have in place. Body checks, super important. I made the same. Well, not the knot on the end of the rope, but I actually climbed the route once on top rope, thinking I had tied in when I hadn't, and it wasn't until I got to the crux that I realised when the belayer took the rope in a little tighter, and I saw the single figure of 8 appear in front of my face, and so I ended up having to put the rope in my mouth and down climb to a cave and then tie back in. So. There's been some notable accidents with some Lynn Hill, John Long, and many others have ended up, falling to the ground because they hadn't tied in. And that's an interesting one, because one of my big bugbears is I actually encourage people when I'm teaching to, if someone interrupts you when you're tying in, be rude to them, as rude as you can, because that then might trigger a response. That one of the worst things we can do as climbers is interrupt someone when they're tying their knot. So if I find myself handing quick draws to someone as they're tying in, I will apologize to make it clear that I recognize that I just interrupted something, and I'll let them finish what they're doing, because there's a natural politeness of people just to stop what they're doing and receive the things that someone's passing, and they don't go back to finishing the knot, which is what happened to me. I was in the middle of tying in, I put the rope on my harness, and someone threw me a chocolate bar, which I couldn't resist. So I ate the chocolate bar, and then I proceeded to put my shoes on and climb, but I hadn't finished my knot. So there's often usually a reason why something happens, and if you can identify what it is, you can take it out of the system. Like tying a knot in the end of the rope, for instance, as you mentioned. There's so many other things that we need to be doing as well as tying a knot in the end of the rope. And an example of that was when I'm lowering someone down, or when I'm teaching people to belay, when they're lowering, I ask them to take the belay glasses off, and I ask them to look at the rope more than the climber they're lowering, because the rope is always next to you, so there's no excuse for not knowing that it's there. And if you're just relying on the knot, when the knot does reach your belay device and jams, it could also be that now you have a problem, because the climber might be away from the rock. So you've saved them from serious injury, perhaps, but you still have a problem to solve that you could have solved if you would have recognized that the rope wasn't long enough. So there's a whole set of procedures, like I mentioned before, making sure your rope's long enough for the crag you're going to. You could get on the wrong route and it could be longer, but just things like when you're climbing a route, and when I'm climbing a long route, I'm like, oh, this is a nice long route. And if something in my brain says, well, okay, yeah, and I might shout down to my belayer, how much rope does it look like I've got? And they might look down and go, yeah, it looks like you've got plenty. Or they might say, it doesn't look like you've got enough to get back down. And as a belayer, you should be also paying attention to that. They're going a long way. I thought this route was 25 meters. It looks like they're going at least 30 meters already. And then you start the process of being aware of where the danger's coming from, which is often right next to you on the floor. So the sort of things I've seen where the knot in the end of the rope lets you down is, for instance, someone in the group picks up the end of the rope, which I've seen on multiple occasions, and practices tying their knot on their harness. And then when they finished, they put the rope down. And then the belayer is now belaying with a rope that they think has a knot in the end, and it's not there. I've seen that on several occasions.
Yeah, and it's just all those variables that just do not exist in a climbing wall. I'm just going to jump over to a question that we hadn't got to, and I think you had answered it, but Tom had asked, why is it better to put your own gear in whenever you're top roping rather than using whatever lower off happens to be on the crag?
Okay, so the gear on the crag it's not always something that will move. Like if it, in short, you will wear out the equipment. A rope running through, say, a mayon or a fixed snap gate on an anchor, you'll wear a groove in that piece of equipment, and then over time, the anchor will become unusable. So someone eventually will have to buy a new anchor, go up, take the old bolts off or replace the bolts, and then change the chain and the rings that are associated with that anchor. So you're protecting the in situ protection by, running the rope through your own quick draws or your screw gate rather than the anchor itself. So just the last person at the end. So if you're in a group of 5 or 6 and one person lowers down off an anchor, that's reducing the wear and tear on the anchor massively.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got another question here from Chris. It says there was a lot of loose rope around your feet. Would you leave it, if there was a lot of loose rope around your feet, would you leave it loose or tidy it up by clipping it into the carabiner to avoid a trip hazard? What's your guidance?
With that method, there's often a lot of spare rope. The backup knot, tie close to your harness with a long loop, That will reduce some of the length of the rope. It's better to leave it loose. I know a lot of people don't like it because it seems sort of messy or whatever, but if the knot is close to your harness, even if that gets jammed on the way down, if you're on a slab, you will be able to reach it and you'll be able to unhook it. You're a climber, you'll be able to climb back up and remove it. The problem with attaching the end to you, what you then now have is a loop. If you attach the end to yourself, often people will attach it to their gear loop. So as you're lowering down, if the rope between your gear loop and your belay loop snags on something on the way down, like a tree or a spike of rock, you might be going fast enough to actually break your gear loop, because it's not designed to, most of them aren't designed to hold much more than 5 kilograms. So it's possible to break your gear loop. Yeah. So there's no real disadvantage with having the long rope hanging down, as long as it's not got a knot in the very end.
Yeah.
And even if it has, you've already climbed the route once. You could always climb up to unsnag it. You could hold it in your hand if you really want to make it look tidier.
Yeah. We've got loads and loads of questions to get through, and only about 3 minutes left. So I'm going to kind of skip around and just ask a couple of different things. We were going to talk about quick draws, but I know you've got there's a video on your website. Is there anything in particular, any kind of top tips for if somebody was going to buy quick draws?
Okay, quick top tip. Then I'm going to show you a couple quickly. Most important thing is that you have a variety of different lengths, and that'll be apparent from sort of medium, short. 2 very short ones I would consider short. Okay, make sure that the top ends are free easily. The webbing can slide up and down on the top carabiner very easily. Now, most important thing with a quick draw, I think, is this, that they should be able to rotate freely 90 degrees. See this one here now, when I try and rotate, got it upside down, I'll do it this way. When I try and rotate this bottom beaner here, you'll see it gets to 90 degrees and it stops. Now, a quick draw that will keep rotating round, is ultimately much safer than one that will stop at 90 degrees. That would be the worst. If it goes 180, that's fine. But if it only goes 90, it doesn't mean it's dangerous. It just means that you have to be aware of its limitations. So the rope could much more easily unclip if you back clip something like this, whereas if you back clip one that will turn around 180, even if you back clipped it, the rope unclipping is massively unlikely. Also, if the rope is active on a stiff quick draw on the bolt, it could also lead to the quick draw unclipping itself from the bolt.
Okay.
So I would say the most important thing is you have a variety of lengths, maybe even alpine draws, ones that you can extend to a longer length so that you can protect the rope from sharp edges.
Yeah.
And keep the rope running in a straight line. But if you're going to go out and buy a set of draws, make sure that they rotate freely, more than 90 degrees.
Okay.
That'd be my best top tip.
We have so much stuff that we had wanted to get through. I don't think we're going to have time now. I'm just trying to see if there's anything that would be quick to ask. Oh, a quick one. Do you buy a local guide or a rock facts?
If there is a good local guide that you can understand, if it's in English, or if you speak the local language, then buy a local guide. Sometimes just a topo, just the pictures is enough. And often there's a little bit of English in some guides. It is usually best to buy a local guide, because often, not always, but often some of that money gets filtered back into climbing, into re-equipping, maintaining the climbing. So you're doing a good service there and keeping some of the local equippers probably funded in part. So yeah, and then I've got something that I would like to add, certainly before if we do take one more question, but if we don't, so making sure that when we go to the crag that we have a very clear set of rules for ourselves. So what I've noticed is often when I'm speaking, working with clients, is they often come with this very strict set of rules, and I only have 3. So when you're climbing a route, people often say if you go too far left or too far right, you're off route and you're cheating. Not really any such thing as cheating outside unless you're pulling on the quick draws. So I like to think about, if it's safe, it's in. If you're not going too far away from your bolts to or your gear to risk injury, then it's in. If it's fun, and if it's safe.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 things. It has to be fun, safe, and as far as route finding goes, it has to be close enough to your gear so you're not unnecessarily putting yourself at risk. But that's definitely one of the common mistakes I see people doing, is staying so close to the bolts when they're sport climbing that they're not taking the easy route when they've got lots of leeway. So that can be something that we need to be aware of as well. When you're indoors, often the bolts are in a straight line, outside and inside, but the climbing will often veer off left and right, and we need to just make sure that we're staying safe but giving ourselves that freedom to actually climb the route.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, thank you. We've kind of gone ever so slightly over our time. I hope that restrictions ease up all over the world so that we can all get back to climbing in lots of exciting places, and hopefully some people will send out links to everybody who registered for this, obviously to watch again, but also links to Trev's website so that if anybody does fancy going for some coaching, then that's available. If you are just staying in the UK and you're not able to get hold of Trev, then obviously we have coaches and instructors at TCA. You will be able to get personal coaching, lattice assessments, and a movement and technique course for single households whenever we reopen. We'll obviously reopen in Bristol, opening in Glasgow on the 26th. But for the personal coaching, if you can book that for anything at all. So if you just wanted to come and ask more of these sorts of questions and find out more of this kind of stuff, you could just book an hour with a personal coach at TCA and just check with them that they're happy to do that. Please do get coaching to make sure you're doing the right stuff. But just remember to have fun, and we hope that we've given you a few things to think about and hopefully inspired you to go and climb outside and enjoy it. Thank you, Trevor.
Thanks, Helen. Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Bye.